Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a very warm welcome to the 40th ASEAN Roundtable, convened fully as an in-person event. My name is Indira Zahra Aridati, and I will be your MC for this event. Last year, the 39th ASEAN Roundtable examined ASEAN's relevance in shaping the future of Southeast Asia and how ASEAN might rethink its agency in the face of unprecedented global challenges. As the ASEAN Roundtable marks its milestone 40th iteration this year, we will be continuing the discussion with our theme, Surviving or Thriving, ASEAN in an Age of Tariffs, Tensions, and Transitions, highlighting how ASEAN can transform adversity into strategic opportunity and exploring new avenues of cooperation amid a fragmented and increasingly multipolar world. This year's roundtable is once again generously supported by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. We would like to express our deep appreciation for their strong support of the ASEAN Roundtable over the years. Before we begin, please allow me to draw your attention to a few housekeeping matters. This event is on the record and open to media. The ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute reserves the right to make audio and visual recordings of the roundtable and post the recordings on our website. To ask a question, please use the standing microphones in the middle of the rooms or raise your hands when invited by the moderator. State your name and affiliation and direct your question to the relevant speaker. Now to begin the proceedings, I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Choi Kwok, Head of the ASEAN Study Center and Director and CEO of the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute to deliver his welcome remarks. Without further ado, Mr. Choi, please.
Minister Liew Tong, Malaysian Minister for International Trade and Investment. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the ASEAN Study Center here at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this 40th ASEAN Roundtable themed Surviving or Thriving, ASEAN in an Age of Tariffs, Tensions, and Transitions. This year's roundtable marks 4 decades since its first inception. Since then, it has become a trusted platform for open dialogue, bringing together policymakers, scholars, and practitioners to reflect on ASEAN's journey. And we believe it continues to serve as a focal point to discuss about the region's relevance in a turbulent world. Today, we are honored to have His Excellency Liew Tong, Deputy Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry of Malaysia, to deliver the keynote address. Minister Liew, we know him very well as both as a politician but also as a scholar, and he has contributed much to our institute over the years. His remarks are going to be particularly timely as Malaysia, under its ASEAN chairmanship, has sought to advance new initiatives that strengthen the region's economy, resilience, and strategic relevance. In a time of shifting global trade patterns and renewed tariff pressures, his perspectives will help to shed light on how ASEAN can navigate these uncertainties while keeping its integration agenda on track. When Malaysia assumed the ASEAN chairmanship this year, Prime Minister Anwar reaffirmed Malaysia's commitment to an inclusive and sustainable ASEAN, reminding us that the region's unity depends on openness, neutrality, and resilience. These principles have underpinned ASEAN's peace and prosperity for over 5 decades, yet they are now being tested more than ever. Across the region, we have seen how global fragmentation and renewed protectionism are reshaping ASEAN's economic and strategic landscape. US tariffs under the second Trump administration, coupled with widening supply chain disruptions, has deepened uncertainty for ASEAN's export-driven economies. Meanwhile, regional flashpoints remain unresolved, as seen in the slow progress on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea and the ongoing political and humanitarian crisis in Myanmar. The recent border disputes between Thailand and Cambodia also serves as a reminder that internal conflicts in the region remain and can flare up from time to time. Yet, despite these challenges, ASEAN has also seen notable achievements that demonstrate the region's resilience and foresight. A key milestone was the adoption of the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 this year, which marks a renewed commitment to a more cohesive, people-centered, and rules-based regional order. Under Malaysia's leadership, ASEAN has also expanded its external partnerships and explored innovative regional initiatives such as the ASEAN GCC China Summit, demonstrating the region's ability, the organization's ability to convene both traditional and emerging powers, and also bridging the divides that may sometimes represent themselves between the North and the South. Institutionally, ASEAN is also evolving. The establishment of the ASEAN Geoeconomics Task Force reflects a recognition that economic and security issues are now deeply intertwined. Similarly, the accession of Timor-Leste as the 11th member of ASEAN earlier this week is a testament to ASEAN's commitment to inclusivity, and we have now a complete Southeast Asia. As ASEAN looks ahead, its continued relevance will depend on its ability to adapt, to innovate, and to deliver tangible outcomes for its people. In this spirit, today's roundtable aims to generate fresh initiatives, fresh policy ideas on how ASEAN can navigate these turbulent times, not merely to survive, but aiming to thrive. We are deeply honored to have an eminent lineup of speakers, very distinguished academics, very seasoned diplomats, and also senior practitioners and politicians, each well known in their respective fields. Their collective experience and insights will enrich our understanding of ASEAN's role in strengthening regional resilience and navigating the uncertainties that now define our times. I would like to also express our gratitude to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for supporting the Roundtable once again this year. Over the decades, CAS has provided ISEAS with unwavering support, particularly in promoting ASEAN research and outreach. And with that, thank you all for being here, and I look forward to a very engaging and fruitful roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. Ladies and gentlemen, I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Mr. Liew Tong, Deputy Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry of Malaysia, to deliver his keynote address for the 40th ASEAN Roundtable. Your Excellency, sir.
Good morning to friends and fellow ASEAN enthusiasts. Mr. Choi, Shing, thank you for inviting me. Ambassador Chan Heng Chi, Tan Sri Nazir Raza, and many other friends whom I know for quite a while. It's an honor for me to be speaking to you at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak platform and at the 40th ASEAN Roundtable. I was ISEAS Fellow in 2006 and 2021. And just to kickstart the morning, when I was first appointed as Deputy Defense Minister in 2018, not many people know me. So in my CV, I wrote that I was so and so and so, including I was a visiting fellow at ISEAS Singapore. And the first attack on me was I was a Singapore spy. But as you know, ISEAS is not a spy agency. My friend Ariel texted me and said she's coming to listen to my propaganda. So I would like to use this as my title today, that generally what I want to speak to you is, I think this time it is different. And ASEAN has agency to shape the global agenda. My original choice was actually a global order, but the rest I think is too heavy. But broadly, we are in a different time now. We're in a different time, and we need a different way of looking at what we are dealing with. Let me start with a moving moment at the ASEAN Summit. At the opening of the ASEAN Summit, I was 3 or 4 rows behind Prime Minister Anwar. And seated, from my perspective, seated left to Prime Minister Anwar was President Lula. And next to him was His Excellency Antonio Costa, the European Council President, who was former Portuguese Prime Minister. When Timor-Leste was admitted admitted to ASEAN, the ceremony was very moving. Seated on the same row was also President Prabowo. Knowing the history of East Timor, or Timor-Leste, knowing the history of what had happened, and thinking about this, why Indonesia intervened in Timor-Leste has a lot to do with the 1974 Carnation Revolution in Portugal. And because of the Carnation Revolution, and the central question in the Carnation Revolution was the Portuguese people rejected the idea that Portugal has to get involved in colonial war. And that resulted in Portugal giving up Timor-Leste and resulting in Indonesian intervention. So thinking about that and seated there, I was deeply moved. Our history in this region is very much a colonial history. Ben Anderson said that the national borders that we have today in ASEAN are essentially colonial borders. Think about this, the borders of Indonesia and Malaysia were decided not during our independence, but it was decided in the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1824. Broadly, the border that we have today was decided in 1824 in the Anglo-Dutch Treaty. So this region was colonized by the Portuguese, followed by Dutch, and followed by the British, and followed by the French. Today, with Timor-Leste joining ASEAN, this region has moved from a land or a region of colonies to a community of nations. And I thought that was quite an interesting and important moment for ASEAN. But more importantly, this is a time for us to think about how to move ASEAN into the future and how to actually take ASEAN more seriously. Mati Natalegawa, former Indonesian foreign minister, in his book, Does ASEAN Matter? A View from Within, emphasized the need for ASEAN to move from a state people-centric organization to a people-centered ASEAN. I think it's time for us to think of ourselves embracing the identity of ASEAN more, knowing that in our history, our nations were created, or in Ben Anderson's words, imagine. There was no Indonesians until there was Indonesia. There was no Malaysians until there was Malaysia. Likewise for other nations. And our nations were created, our nations were imagined. It is now time for us to imagine that there is a possibility at some point that we see ourselves also as ASEAN, the people of ASEAN. If each of our nations were framed and formed and imagined by a mixture of external events and the will of the people, surely we could imagine a stronger ASEAN identity. This ASEAN event that we have just saw, or the multiple ASEAN event that we just saw last week, featured President Donald Trump, Premier Li Qiang, President Lula, President Ramaphosa, Secretary General Guterres, Antonio Costa of EU Council. So in a way, it is a display of our time. It is a display of a multipolar world that is not easily assembled. The collections of leaders are not easily assembled. But this, in a way, shows that ASEAN has convening power. I want to make 2 points on this. Number one, the ASEAN architectures that we have built up over the years through the hard work of all of you, including Professor Chan, over the years, are now very useful. All these architectures are very useful. If we look back, these architectures started with the dialogue partners in the 70s, the ASEAN Regional Forum in the 1990s, as ARF was inaugurated in 1994, the East Asia Summit in 2005, and by 2011, the US and Russia was included in the East Asia Summit, and RCEP. This one we also have an RCEP meeting, or RCEP Leaders Summit. Now, these architectures are very useful, at the least, for people to sit down together. And we know in this time and age, in 2025, just for the leaders to sit down itself has its value, because they will do side deals and eventually there will be trade deals. But the other point I would like to make is also, if you look at how Prime Minister Anwar shaped the meeting, there is a certain view there, that we think the world is not a world between McDonald's or dim sum, or my northern Chinese friends say dumpling. Between McDonald's and dim sum or dumpling, the world is more than that. The world has dal, the world has sushi, the world has tom yum, the world has nasi lemak. It is important for us not to fall into the prism of G2, or looking at the world as between the United States and China. I think we don't believe in that, and we shouldn't fall into that. I think once you go to the bookshops, once you go on talk shows, every communication, every point is about China and US. But as Southeast Asian, as the people of Southeast Asia, as part of ASEAN, we must resist seeing the world as between US and China. We must do everything possible to reflect the architectures that we have built. In Thomas Parkes, in his book, Southeast Asia's Multipolar Future, Averting a New Cold War, says that by the early 2020s, Southeast Asia was too far into the diversification path for the great powers to force them into a bloc. I think that is quite clear. Our architecture, the path that we have taken, has always been about creating space for ASEAN so that we could avoid choosing. But more importantly, in this day and time, the middle ground that we create, the middle ground that we position or we put in place is important for us and for everyone else. I want to circle back to the point that much as ASEAN thinks of itself as a small organization, much as we are not a huge economy, much as we have multiple teething problems among ourselves and also with our own organization, it is important for us to believe that ASEAN has the potential and agency to shape the global agenda to a certain extent and to shape the emerging global order to a certain extent. The challenge that we are going to deal with and we are going to face with is that for ASEAN to move into the years to come, we have to accept that the world has changed. The world has changed fundamentally in 2025 and in the preceding years, but 2025 is likely to be the pivotal year that you will remember in the years to come. And when in the years to come, say in 2045, when we look back to 2025, we will say that, wow, this is such a year that we saw the world, or the sense shifted, we saw the world change. A year that is comparable to what we are facing. I would say probably 2001. 2001, you probably still remember what you were doing during that summer. 2001, two major events happened. September 11 and US responses to September 11, and subsequently the events that happened as a consequence of September 11 shaped the global security landscape for at least 20 years. It shapes US security priorities. It shaped how US handle Asia. It shaped how US think about the world. And it shaped how we react to those events. And also in 2001, China joined WTO. China joined WTO and shaped the trade landscape for at least until Trump won, if not more. So when China was part of, when China joined WTO and when China became part of WTO, and that global landscape, global trade landscape that was shaped, decided on the fate of Malaysia, on the fate of ASEAN, on the fate of many nations, including decided the fate of factory workers in Michigan. So I think we are in at least that sort of iconic moment. 2025 is that sort of iconic moment that the world has shifted. What happened in this year will have consequences in the years to come. The challenges that we have to deal with is, number one, the separation between economics and politics is, I would say, no longer there. There has always been blurring of line. There has always been a very thin line between economics and politics. But I think we have to admit that moving forward, we have to look at things from the perspective of geopolitics. That every economic decision has security concern. Every security concern has economic consequences. We will have to look at it in this way. So not to fall back into the neoliberal argument is that the state shouldn't get involved in the economy is run by economists. I think we have to move out from that framework. That neoliberal understanding of the world no longer exists. The world moved from just in case to just in time. The world moved from the pursuit of efficiency and for cheapest goods, cheapest services, cheapest supply, to the pursuit of resilience, from efficiency to resilience or de-risking. The mindset is shifting. The consideration has changed. And in this world that companies are no longer singularly pursuing the cheapest input, there are opportunities for ASEAN and for ASEAN supply chains. But we are also in a world, particularly for ASEAN, we will have to confront very, very serious challenges. In simplest terms, I think we have two major challenges at hand that keep the leaders waking up at night. In simplest terms, we have to deal with potential Gen Z protests. Gen Z protests is about jobs, it is about upward social mobility, and it is about economic security. Failing to deal with those challenges will see Gen Z protests happening everywhere. And we will have to deal with that. Our societies are not the most equal. We have neglected our people in the region, and we have people that they are not rich enough to live a decent life, and we'll have to deal with that. Corporations will have to acknowledge that. Government will have to acknowledge that. And policies eventually will have to reflect that. The second challenge is, in a good way, ASEAN societies are generally very young. Comparatively, compared to Japan, Korea, China, ASEAN is young. Malaysia's median age is 31. The Philippines' median age is 25. Indonesia is around 25 or 26. We have a relatively young region. But in 20 years' time, if we do not get rich, and if we do not get rich before we get old, we'll be in trouble. So the second challenge is really how to, apart from dealing with Gen Z protests, it is about how to ensure that we get rich before we get old. And of course, in between, we have to deal with potential wars among our midst. We have to deal with potential geopolitical, economic challenges and competitions. We have to deal with financial crisis. We have to deal with climate disasters. And we will have to deal with potential pandemics. So that should frame our mind. What do we do together and how we should deal with the challenges together? I think we should position ASEAN in the following three middles. The first middle is that ASEAN is the indispensable middle in technology and supply chain. In 2022, in May 2023, I visited Detroit and subsequently DC. And during the Detroit trip, the then Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, told a group of ASEAN ministers, she said, when Malaysia locked down, General Motors had to shut down because Malaysia produces about 30% to 1/3 of global automotive chips. Global automotive chips are not the most profitable products, but it is in big volume. Quite a few of them are produced in Malaysia, and when Malaysia locked down the factories during COVID, Kia, Hyundai, General Motors had to shut down because we do have a certain indispensable part of the supply chain that is located in Malaysia. What ASEAN should do is to believe that, or to actually put in place policy to ensure that we could strengthen the indispensable middle. We probably will have to accept that in the years to come, we may not be able to create the top technology. We may not be able to create the top technology of in the light of Japan, Korea, US, China. But we could stay in the middle, just stay below the top technology nations and create an ASEAN supply chain that is strong, that is an important locations of innovation, and that I think will last us for the longest of time. The second middle is that we must hold on to this middle ground. We must hold on to this geopolitical middle ground so that we are not only not choosing, we are the convener of superpowers, but also we maintain this middle ground so that we ensure that the world does not entering into a bifurcated world in terms of the economy, in terms of technology, and in terms of geopolitics. I joke with my American friends. I say, you're happy to see Chinese billionaires, Chinese tech bros living in Tokyo. You should likewise be very happy to see Chinese entrepreneurs living in Singapore or Malaysia. We are a middle ground for American businesses to do business with the Chinese. And this is a safe ground for everyone. And we should strengthen that middle ground, that safe middle ground for businesses, for the people, for ideas to thrive in a world that has a potential tendency to bifurcate. The third middle is middle class. This is my interpretation of ASEAN 2045. I think ASEAN 2045, if I were to say what I want to see and one single thing that I want to see, I would like everyone to see that we must build a middle class society in ASEAN. There's no point to have, I have to rephrase it. I shouldn't say no point, but it's not, it's good to have several hundred million population. It's good to have 600 million, 680 million, 700 million population in ASEAN. But 700 million populations of poor people would not move the needle. Okay? 700 million of poor people would not move the needle. But imagine that if ASEAN could replicate what China did in terms of the creation of the middle class in China, ASEAN would be a very interesting place. When China joined WTO, by most accounts, China had about 100 million middle class. Today, by any account, China has at least 500 million Chinese living a middle class life. Our the complaints that you read from Financial Times and The Economist, is that this middle class do not want to spend. We don't complain that they are not middle class, we complain that they are not spending enough. Imagine that ASEAN would have 300 million ASEAN people living a middle class life, living a genuine middle class life. Then ASEAN would not just be a production site. See, the way we see about ASEAN, we always think that ASEAN is a production site. ASEAN is to produce for advanced economy, and we're here to attract them to come in to invest here because we think that we are short of capital. We think that we need their capital, we need their technology. But we may have to turn this around. If ASEAN is a rich place, if ASEAN has a sizable middle class, ASEAN is also a consumer. ASEAN, it is in the interest of Europe, it is in the interest of US, it is in the interest of China to see a strong middle class in ASEAN, and we will have to work towards that. And with ASEAN being a strong middle class, having a strong middle class, ASEAN will be a different place. But to go there, we have to change the way we think about things. We have to change the way we think about competition. There's very little to compete between Malaysia and Singapore. There's very little to compete between Malaysia and Vietnam in the new global context. Why? For 20 years, the world's investment all went to China. Right? There was no need for Malaysia or Vietnam to exist to a large extent, as far as the supply chain is concerned. But today, the core idea, the fundamental idea of this era is de-risking. And think about this, in terms of semiconductor, it is very interesting to see that the supply chains in Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam, if you combine them, is quite unparalleled globally. They are not the most sophisticated, but they are most complex and comprehensive. You think about semiconductor outside US, China, and Europe, not many other places have such a comprehensive and complex supply chain. You may think about some in Mexico, some in Poland, some in Ireland, some parts of Eastern European countries, and a bit of India. Nothing much. And this is where I think we must change the way we think about the region. Singapore doesn't have to compete with Malaysia. Malaysia doesn't have to compete with Vietnam. We could be one comprehensive supply chain, and we could find ways to complement each other more than we have done. Secondly, we have to do new things, and we have to do things differently. I don't like the text of most ASEAN what they call documents, and even in our own thinking, we kept thinking that we have to help the MSMEs. We think that we have to our societies only have SMEs and FDI. I mean, this thinking is not just in Malaysia, not just in other ASEAN countries, even in Singapore. The way we see about our economy is always FDI equals to technology, as FDI equals to capital. Whereas our own people, our own businesses are SMEs. And we now added the M there, MSMEs. Here is where I want to congratulate Tan Sri Nazir Razak. I mentioned his name in Parliament. I mentioned his name in many places because he pushed ASEAN government to think about the idea of having ASEAN business entities. That means at some point, we should recognize companies, ASEAN companies that operate in more than 2 countries as ASEAN corporations. And I want to push this a bit further, that we should start thinking about ASEAN multinationals. That we could create a mini Huawei, we could create a mini Samsung, we could create a mini TSMC among our midst. And we shouldn't be seeing ourselves just as trading nations, but we should also see ourselves as the indispensable middle technology nations. And this, I think, requires us to see our region in a different way. And in the report that Mari Pengestu and some other friends put together, and in this committee that I co-chair with my Indonesian counterpart, we also promoted the idea that we may have to start talking about common external tariff. We've never touched this topic, but now that we are not just dealing with the Trump tariff, we are also dealing with this second order effect that we see influx of cheaper goods. We're dealing with overcapacity. We may have to start thinking about a common external tariff. And we may have to start thinking about an ASEAN industrial policy. I know these are difficult topics. These are topics that we have not touched upon. But this is the time for us to think seriously about how to shape our region in a different way. As we are no longer just, when we think about industry and economy, we have to now think about material. We have to now think about minerals. We have to now think about AI, machines, AI. We have to think about energy. We have to think about money, and we have to combine them together. There used to be a time that we think that these are separate. But in a different time, of course, Kenneth Rogoff, in his book, in his semi-autobiography book, warned against the idea of this time it is different because every scam tells you that this time it is different. But I truly think that we are in a different time, and we need a different way of looking at our time. And this is the time that ASEAN can advance entirely new ideas for us to move forward. And I look to this conversation as well as this roundtable to provide ideas that we have not implemented before, and also ideas that we have not discussed before in the context of a new global situation. and hopefully we can together shape a new global order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Liew. I'm not going to take too much time to summarize what he said. I think you all heard it, but I do want to kind of ask a couple of follow-up questions, and I try to link it to the especially the last part of Minister Liew's comments, which talks about the three middles. I think one of the middles that he talked about is the fact that as ASEAN grows, there is a need to work ourselves out of, I think, a certain impulse, which is to compete between and within ASEAN countries. And I think this is one of the issues that, indeed, as we talk about building greater, regional integration, this issue definitely has to be addressed. At the same time, all leaders in ASEAN countries are politicians, right? Whatever is the governance system that they have within them, they have to answer to national interests. They have to answer to national impulses and also to deliver for their own nationals. So, Minister Liew, could you just could you just try and give us a bit of elaboration on how you think ASEAN member states can achieve a good balance between national priorities, particularly in the economy, versus the regional priorities in the economic sense? So over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. I know this question is very difficult. Even the Europeans don't know how to answer. They took them 50 years to try to answer it, and they are not very successful at it. But generally, I think if our mindset is that if our world is no longer trying to find the cheapest product, our world emphasize more on resilience, and resilience become the primary concern of our prime ministers, our our corporations, then our consideration becomes very different. For instance, Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone. This is a fantastic idea to put together two very important regions and to find synergy. But if this exercise is an exercise of creating cheaper production site, very soon the Singaporeans will feel that either the Singapore shop owners will feel that their clients are all going to Johor, or the Singapore landowner will feel that they are losing their tenants. But if resilience is at the core of the framework, if let's say, for example, this is about ensuring supply chain resilience, if this is about ensuring food security, say in the crisis of COVID-26, what do we do? If we can not repurpose, but we can actually use JSSCZ as a platform to ensure that in any event of pandemic or disaster or war, there will be supply of food to Singapore, let's say, and there's assurance. That becomes comforting for the people of Singapore, not just the leaders, but the people of Singapore, to know that Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone is not to take away your jobs or take away your rental yield, but actually to ensure that there will be food security. And if we no longer think of just FDI, but we think of, we need FDI to a certain extent, but we also actually have capital. In the regions, we have sovereign wealth funds that invest so much in the US market that sometimes I speak to the executive, they are now very worried. Should they put all their money in the US, or should they start putting money in the region? But there may not be enough sizable companies that will bring yield, the sort of yields of a US stock market in ASEAN. So they are caught. But if we are now determined to say that we want to create ASEAN multinationals that stretches beyond our national borders, we have companies that are Malaysia, Singapore combined, and they are in the top technology or they are pursuing technology, they pay well, they work together because of the supply chain, then I think the question is no longer competition. The question is we need each other. And I think the time has come because the world of finances alone is ending. I think in the years to come, you will see many students trying to study AI. You'll see many more students trying to study, for example, minerals, for example, material, because we are no longer outsourcing all the material, minerals, and machine work to China. The world is now diversifying, and we need to now build that interlocking and interconnected understanding of our economy, as well as the supply and also knowledge to support this economy. So that, I think, is something that we should build upon.
Thank you very much. I have other questions I'd like to ask, but to be fair to all the audience who are here to benefit from your advice, I'm going to really just throw it open now to the audience. And I think I see our good friend already lining up. So maybe over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. Thank you for your very inspiring speech, Mr. Liew. My name is Ian Chong. I teach at the National University of Singapore. So my question looks like this. Take off from your point about imagination. One of the things that seems to beset ASEAN is that as an organization, the institutional capacity seems somewhat limited. Coordination problems, collective action problems seem to get in the way of better cooperation. So what is your proposal for how ASEAN members can get around these challenges? Bearing in mind that when you talk about the middle, one of the things about being in the middle is that you can be caught in between as well. There will possibly be pressure from one or both major powers and perhaps others as well. And in light of your sort of reference to resilience and robustness, how do we create a situation where we can better withstand those kinds of pressures, not if, but when they come? Thank you.
To answer the second question, there is a saying that we either hang together or we are hung separately. If we recognize that being in the middle, we can be squeezed and it is not desirable, then we better hang together and do more. And back to the first question, I know this is not necessarily the most popular idea, especially in Singapore, but even with my government may not be the most popular idea. I think the richer country in ASEAN, particularly Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, and to a certain extent Indonesia, we should pay more to sustain a stronger ASEAN Secretariat. We should not fall back on everyone contributing equally. The richer countries should contribute more, and in whatever form, whatever way, I think we can talk about it. The mechanism can be work on, but the key idea is, I think the richer countries in ASEAN must pay more, must do more in order to ensure that the poorest part of the region will have better access to power, better access to livelihood, and they will also have a chance to see a better life through ASEAN. If they see a better life through ASEAN, then there will be faith in ASEAN. And we all have to deal with Gen Z's protests. We all have to deal with getting our people, making sure our people are richer before we get old. And therefore, a much stronger ASEAN Secretariat funded by the richer nation in ASEAN, as well as a lot more, to do more to ensure that
their accessibility and equity in whatever we do. For instance, ASEAN Power Grid. With the signing of the recent MOU, we're now talking about the involvement of Asia Development Bank, the World Bank, in bringing in blended financing. I think we will have to think of how to ensure that through all this, Laos, while it produces energy, it doesn't have enough electricity. How do we ensure that Laos has better access to energy? How do we ensure that the rural part of Malaysia, the rural part of Indonesia will have better access to energy? I think all this we will need a new mind frame. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm opening it up, but in view of the fact that we only have 10 minutes left, please come and line up at the mics. I'll take a few questions at a time so that all these questions can be already thought about while they are being asked. Yeah, so please come quickly to the mics. Yes, I see Hok An there and another person behind, but anyone else? I know there are media people here. If you want to ask questions, please line up. Yeah.
Good morning. Hok An from ISEAS. Good to see you, Minister Liew Tong. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think it has your signature coherence, long-term vision and optimism. But I think maybe to draw us back to this year, you talk about it being a pivotal year and facing this critical challenge early in the year with the Trump tariffs and ASEAN, Malaysia on behalf of ASEAN announced that there would be some coordinated action. I'm just wondering if you could evaluate, having gone through that, and with the summit, we see that it's been more of a bilateral basis than ASEAN actually having a stance. But I guess being privy to some of the internal discussions, how would you critically evaluate this experience with ASEAN having to navigate the Trump tariffs and promising to try to do that collectively, but I think not really delivering on that front. If I could add on as one, maybe a bit of a tangent, but here's tapping into your experience, Minister of International Investment, Trade and Industry, and previously Deputy Minister of Defense for Malaysia. What, if anything, is the state of discussions within ASEAN regarding, if you talk about being in the middle, one aspect of that as well is about the arms militarization and pressures to increase military spending. And do you think that is something that ASEAN needs to also coordinate and maybe exercise some restraint in line with what you think of with the principle of being in the middle? Thank you.
Thank you, Hok An. Yeah, okay.
Good morning, everyone. This is Anish Mishra from the Conrad Adenauer Foundation. I would like to thank Minister Liew for the excellent keynote address that you have gave, and I would also like to congratulate Malaysia for hosting the very successful ASEAN summit. My question is, since you're the Deputy Minister for Investment, Trade and Industry, could you shed some light on how was Malaysia able to use its position as ASEAN chair to negotiate the tariffs for Trump, not just to present the Malaysia case, but the case for ASEAN as a whole? And my second question is that, Donald Trump has decided to keep the tariffs for Malaysia at 19%, but I do understand that from the visit of Donald Trump to the ASEAN summit, certain key industries, Malaysia has got 0% tariffs, and I think palm oil exports, which is very important to Malaysia, has benefited from this 0% tariffs. So to what extent was the peace deal that Malaysia made between Thailand and Cambodia that actually got Malaysia a very good deal with President Trump? Thank you very much.
Okay, one more question from this side of the room.
Thank you. I'm Tiffany McDonald, the Australian Ambassador to ASEAN. And can I start by first congratulating Malaysia on such a successful set of summits? Was really very impressive to see how well Malaysia handled so many meetings and dynamics. And truly was ASEAN was on the world stage. Can I just pick up, Vice Minister Liew Tong, on a couple of comments you made, particularly around the ASEAN Geoeconomics Task Force and discussions on, if I understood you correctly, potential collective tariffs by ASEAN and a potential collective ASEAN industrial policy. From the Australian government perspective, we've been very pleased to see ASEAN's collective response reaffirming support for rules-based trade and refraining from imposing tariffs. My Prime Minister has described tariffs as an act of self-harm, and we see them as contrary to achieving ongoing economic growth. So I'm quite interested to understand a bit more about that thinking and whether or not that's actually something that's in prospect.
Thank you to Hao An, Anish, and Excellency Tiffany. There's an ongoing ADMM meeting in Kuala Lumpur. So as far as the defense side, I don't want to go too much into it, Hao An. But generally, I think we need to coordinate more, and we need to ensure that we at least there are sufficient confidence building among ASEAN armed forces, so that we avoid internal differences as much as possible. But as far as I think there are two questions about the US. When Trump announced his tariffs on Liberation Day on 2nd of April, Malaysia, through our ASEAN chair, convened ASEAN economic ministers meetings, and we also convened ASEAN economic ministers meeting with China, with Australia, New Zealand, with Japan, and also with EU. So we put together quite a few meetings to formulate, number one, we agreed not to retaliate, because honestly, retaliating also could be meaningless because we may not have the leverage over the United States. Secondly, understanding that the United States wants unilateral and also just bilateral arrangement without multilateral arrangement. Each of the countries went into negotiating separately. And I think that's the reality that we have to deal with. In Malaysia, there were a lot of questions, and I answered in Parliament yesterday. They say, why is this not reciprocal? Why is this asymmetric? The whole exercise is asymmetric. The whole exercise is because the United States thinks that it has leverage over everyone. And in reality, we are all dependent on the US market, not just each of us, but also China, Japan, Korea, Germany, Europe. They are all dependent on the US market, and dependent on this idea that the United States is the consumer of the last resort, and in many instances, the consumer of the first resort. So that is a dependency that I think we have to work together to ensure that in the years to come, we will not be dependent on it. Therefore, in the work of the ASEAN Joint Economic Task Force that I co-chair, we try to put in place ideas for debates. We are not saying that we are adopting these ideas. We're saying that we're putting these ideas up for discussions and debates to formulate a nation that includes the three middle, and to see a stronger middle class so that the world has one more region that actually consume and not just produce. On our negotiation with the US, I guess certain things happened fortuitously, but to clarify, there are very few items were zero rated, but there were 1,711 tariff line which are not subjected to the 19% reciprocal tariff, which means they are back to the previously agreed tariff of 5, 6, 7, or 8%. So they are not subjected to 19%, they are subjected to a lower tariff. On the questions by Excellency Tiffany, we are not saying that these are decisions. It's not ASEAN decisions. These are suggestions being put forward because we think that we are not dealing with just Trump tariff. We are also dealing with the challenge of second order effect. from overcapacity in the region. It's not just Chinese overcapacity. It's the whole region producing for the United States and now having to sell less to the United States, and we have to prepare to sell more to each other. And in that sort of circumstances, we have to ask ourselves, what do we do? Do we talk to each other and to ensure that there are defense mechanisms? We may not do it, but we may have to think of regional defense mechanism that we could put in place instead of just thinking national. So this idea of common tariff, external tariff, is mainly to start thinking of regional mechanism to avoid individual country pursuing protectionist policies. This is a difficult question. So the free trade world thinks that there shouldn't be borders. But we're now dealing with an era where everyone is erecting a wall, yet each of us are too small. So we may have to talk to each other to find ways to see whether we want to erect certain wall at the regional door rather than at the nation's gate. So that conversation should start. It doesn't have to have any concrete solutions or decision now, but to start thinking of a potential regional border in trade is something that I guess it's going to be controversial, but it's something that we may have to talk through. Now, and on industrial policy, it is quite an interesting experience for me. Recently, through the Southeast Asia Iron and Steel Association, Malaysia hosted an ASEAN steel meeting. So the iron and steel industry players, they talk to each other year in, year out. But this was the first time that there was an ASEAN policymakers meeting on the steel industry. And I found out that our officials dealing with the steel industry have never talked to each other. Each of them in ASEAN countries talks to the investors or talk to industrial player, but they don't talk to each other. So when we were seated around the room, and I thought the number one concern is overcapacity, number two concern is decarbonization, and everywhere you go, when people talk about steel, these are the two agenda. And to my surprise, what is on top of the head of everyone, the number one concern is inferior steel quality that causes building collapsing during earthquake. Because almost everyone just had an earthquake or just dealing with building collapsings. So I think it's time for ASEAN not to just bring together the trade officials. Trade officials meet 10 times a year or 20 times a year. But it's time to bring together officials dealing with industries so that they talk to each other and to see how to coordinate. And there was also a very interesting discussion during the steel meeting. We brought in also the Chinese Iron and Steel Association, which is a semi-regulator. And they came to explain to us how China removed and eliminated 150 million metric tons of steel making capacity between 2016 and 2017. They used guns, they used thermal satellite to see which company continue to produce, and they put people in jail in order to remove that 150 million of inferior steel capacity, in part because of overcapacity and also in part because they are inferior. So I told them, I told the Chinese, did you know that all of those that you have removed, they all set up shops in Southeast Asia? And they say, yeah, if China ever go into another round of elimination of steel capacity, they must talk to ASEAN. They must talk to us, and they want to talk to us, because whatever they do with so much effort is in a way wasted, because all this capacity comes to Southeast Asia and contributed to the global overcapacity of steelmaking. So And my point about industrial policy is not necessarily industrial policy as we understand it, but it's really coordination among nations to ensure that we don't go into overcapacity, to ensure that we work with each other in sync, and to ensure that we deal with the points of having material, minerals, energy, AI, and finances to bring things together. Thank you.
Well, actually, we should be bringing the session to an end now, but I can't resist to make one very brief follow-up question, because I think you mentioned 2 points which really do think out the box. I think it comes from the report. One, you mentioned about strengthening the secretariat, which then would be larger in size, but in the end, it's about empowerment, right? Not just the size. Then you also talked about common tariff, common industrial policy. So do you see ASEAN actually moving from what it is, an intergovernment organization, to becoming a more of a supranational organization like the EU, even if it is just in trade and economic areas? Do you see that as a possibility in the future beyond just dealing with the immediate problems?
I try to avoid the EU comparison because the moment everyone sees EU, they don't want to become EU. But I would like to say the following. Number one, I would like to see a lot more leaders talking to each other, and for ASEAN to a certain extent to be a lot more leaders-led. I say this because I think officials has limited mandate, but leaders. I spent half an hour watching Prime Minister Lawrence Wong's interview with Financial Times. And for Singaporeans, if you have not watched it, please watch. It's not propaganda. It's a very good interview. Now, I think the leaders realize that they have to deal with challenges that they have not seen in their lifetime. Yeah, I can see from the interview of with Prime Minister Lawrence Wong that he sees it coming. So, on the one hand, I think the leaders need to spend more time without officials, talking to each other, and thinking through the problem and work with each other. Secondly, I think we need to go beyond trade deals. We need to look at different parts of the economy and coordinate the multiple factors of economy. So we have now the ASEAN Energy Center to talk about power grid, which is good. But the next thing is, how do you bring investment? How do you bring money? So among the ASEAN sovereign wealth funds, do they talk to each other? It doesn't necessarily have to be an ASEAN institution, but there should be a platform. Of course, Nazir is very good at creating platforms. We need platforms to bring money to where it's needed. So more conversation beyond the current setup is important. But thirdly, is really we need to be prepared to spend more resources, to have more resources, and to also say that there are in certain areas we can have shared responsibility. It doesn't necessarily have to cede control, but more coordination beyond the existing structure and more shared responsibilities in policy areas where we can find collaboration. Of course, it doesn't have to be everyone doing it together. The format of Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone, extending beyond into, say, Riau Islands, going back to the Sijori vision, that can be one way. Giving new lease of life to BIM Niaga, giving new lease of life to IMGT. I think these are structures that we have in our books, but now it required a new generation of leaders, a new generation of officials, new generations of entrepreneurs and corporate leaders to seize the moment and also to see the importance of repurposing what we have for the years to come. I grew up in the 90s, and I look at how Anwar operated what he's doing with ASEAN. I find a lot of traces back to the ideas of the 90s. The 90s was an era where ASEAN was going out, ASEAN was confident, ASEAN was creating institutions to do more than what it was doing. I think this is the time that requires us to have that spirit, that we either hang together more or we hang separately.
Ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned at the beginning of this that this forum is about creating new ideas. I think Minister Liew has actually given us many new ideas to think about and how we can carry ASEAN forward. Please join me in giving him a round of applause.